All right, so the next component of the game is the narrator. So this is going to work a lot like the character, and you're going to be making this at the same time as the character. Uh, yeah, so it works pretty much the same, but you're going to be working on generating the world, right? So starting from here, you're going to be working on making all the characters that are in this world, as well as the monsters, as well as the places that the characters are going to find. So if you look closely, you can see that there are some similarities here between the character sheet. And more importantly, when before you start making your narrator, you're going to have to discuss with all your players kind of what direction you want to go in this game. So the game that we're going to be playing, or the game that I'm going to be showing you guys, is kind of a medieval Renaissance fantasy game. There's going to be spells, swords, monsters, and all sorts of cool things like that. Yeah, so as the narrator, I'm going to be generating a world that kind of can harbor those stories. So I'm going to have to be thinking carefully about where I put my points in my influences, and kind of how this sheet's gonna work to generate stories as I'm sitting playing the game with my players. So yeah, let's get making this character. All right, here we are with our narrator sheet, and we have our abilities, and you can see here our familiar three Fs: Force, Finesse, and Fortitude. They work pretty much exactly the same for the narrator as they do for the character. Force is your ability to create and destroy. Finesse is your ability to change, grow, and move. And Fortitude is your ability to remain the same, static, and unchanged. And well, moving right along here, we've got our impact. So this is your narrator's level. Once again, if you level this up, you kind of get more abilities. It gets easier for you to gain experience. And yeah, it's kind of one of the major goals of the game. Moving across here, we have our influences. So we have three categories of influence, kind of like the characters have three categories of talent. Our influences here are ethereal, natural, and people. Ethereal is divided into knowledge, mystery, and technology. So depending on kind of where you want your character or your world to kind of reside mentally or ethereally, I guess, is kind of where you're going to put in dots. So knowledge is like how people understand or know things. Mystery is the things that people don't know in the world, or the things that govern the world that are unknown to the people that live there. And technology is how people employ, the things around them, employ maybe the knowledge physically on the world around them. Natural regards the things that are like weather, geography, and wildlife, of course. So weather, you want to make storms, you do want to make weather a central component of the stories that you tell, or maybe geography. Maybe the characters are traveling a lot, so geographical differences are going to be a major plot device. Or wildlife. Perhaps the characters are up against wild beasts that kind of come in from the lands, or they're maybe hunting something with a lot of social status. Yeah. People. So we've got politics, lifestyle, and taboo. So politics is how the people of the world organize themselves, and what kind of rules they live by. Lifestyle is kind of how they expect to live. So it can be good or bad. People can expect to live with a bunch of amenities, or people can expect to live kind of crappy, but strive to live better. And it just could be a fact of life that it's harsh where they are. Taboo are the things that are unacceptable to the people in your world. So it's good to employ these kind of things in role playing, kind of keep a good idea how much taboo kind of rules people's lives. Maybe the world that you're living in doesn't really have a lot of taboo, and a lot of stuff is permitted, but maybe in this world there are a few things that people find really abhorrent, and you just don't want to transgress those social lines. So yeah, those are basically your influences, and right next to that we have our experience. We've basically gone across the top of the character sheet, and there's only a few more unique components to the narrator sheet that we're going to go over next. Alright, so this large section here is our narrator traits, and you can see the bottom here we have resources just like a character does, and this is going to determine how many items you start with as a narrator, as well as how many items villages start with when you play a game. You can also use traits to buy monsters and side characters, as well as bend the rules of the game, or give yourself bonuses to certain dice sets and rolls. Right next to that we have our village component. So as you're playing, you're going to fill this in, but before we kind of know what the world map is, this is going to remain blank. It'll be really easy to fill in once you come to it, but basically this is going to be how you keep track of your players' desire to change the way villages work. So we have 3 different components here. We have tasks, enemies, and catastrophes. So if the players want to change a village item, they'll have a certain number of tasks to complete equal to the village level. If they fail a certain number of times against village side characters, they're going to make enemies, and these characters are going to actively kind of pursue making the characters' lives harder. And if the characters fail too many dungeons in a village, they're going to activate a catastrophe which could threaten the village altogether and wipe it off the map. So that's basically how those things work. You're going to find more rules about that in the character sheet, and I'll show you guys how they work in game. And then we have our items section. This works pretty similarly to a character's item, but you're going to be thinking more on a macro level. So your items aren't going to be things that a single character is going to use, but it's going to be things that fuel stories. So maybe a storm, or a rising army, or random interdimensional portals or something, anything cool, any kind of cool idea you can think of that's going to give you good idea, or point the direction of the story in one direction. Haha. So I'll show you guys kind of how to use those items as we play, but I'll give you a quick description of kind of how some of them are going to work. So you can use items with special features that either allow you to promote or create dungeons quicker, or that are going to influence the frequency of certain items in dungeons. So like whether treasure or libraries or altars or more monsters are going to show up in dungeons. So yeah, that's really going to affect how you guys play the game. It could affect how players approach dungeons. So they're going to be mostly acting against these items, and you should give them the opportunity to break them. Because that's going to give them the feeling of achieving things. It's going to also make you progress the story. You're going to have to create a new item or a new set of items. They're going to take the story in a different direction, maybe a whole new set of monsters. But this is going to be mostly what you're preoccupied with as a narrator, is creating items. It's going to give you experience. It's going to allow you to flex the most power within the game. And it's also going to keep you rolling dice. I mean, that's the biggest component of the narrator system, is making you more of a player, rolling dice at the table and reacting to what the players are doing, so that you're not wasting hours and hours of pre-planning and storytelling at home that nobody really gets to see, because, I don't know, maybe a character does something really clever and it's like, well, you can't fault your players for having fun and being clever. All you can really do is roll with the punches and kind of move the game forward. And that's exactly how this item system works. So hopefully you guys get a good taste of that as we play. And yeah, we can move on and kind of get the story going on this game. Cool. Hey, so the next part to keep the ball rolling here, we're going to be doing the world map. So once you filled out your character sheet and narrator sheet, you're going to get a grid piece of paper here, and pick out 6 different colors of marker. So they're going to represent the 6 different world map tiles. We have desert, tundra, mountain, forest, plains, and water. And yeah, so you're going to pick out 6 different colors to represent those. I've got my 6 different colors, only 4 of which are represented at the moment. And you're going to put them down on the grid here. So if you can't find a grid, I don't know, you can find like maybe like a circle and just trace around it or something like that. But when you put down your map tiles, you're going to put them all adjacent to each other. So whoever gets to pick the first map tile, they get to decide where the game starts. I just plunked it down right in the middle because I want to expand outwards. I think that'll be fun. And on the map, each one of these tiles represents 1 day of travel. And when you're moving across the map, you're going to encounter encounters. And depending on the map tile level, is going to increase the level of encounters. So a map tile level is equal to the map tile plus any adjacent tiles of the same type. So right here we have our village, which is on a plains tile, and we have 3 adjacent tiles that are plains, which would make this tile a level 4. Alright, so a little bit closer view of our world map here. We've got our hex grid and 4 colors on the map and 2 little V's. So these are going to represent our villages. Villages have to be 3 spaces away. Each player playing the game gets to place a village, and each player gets 7 world map tiles to start. So you get to choose whatever world map tiles or colors that you guys have decided to start with, but discuss with your players at the beginning of the game. If you want to lock off some tiles, be like, oh, I don't want any desert to start, or I don't want any tundra to start, just kind of like what we have here. Yeah, you can discuss that with your players, and as long as everybody decides that that's okay, that should work for your game. Try to work together to make your map. You know, sometimes you get maps that don't make sense, and that's fine too. You know, have a lot of fun with your map. If you want to make a map that doesn't make any sense, that could be fun for a story, right? But always think about like how it fits in with the narrative. So just keep that in mind. So each town that you guys visit in the game is going to be kept track of on the village, or on the town sheet. So each town has its own array of items, so I'll give you kind of a closer look here. And these items are going to kind of work pretty similarly to your narrator items. They're going to be kind of like macro items. Although some of them may represent things that the characters can use directly, like maybe mills, foundries, blacksmiths, and things like that. Most of them are going to be items that the village is going to use in social combat to kind of protect its interests against the characters. So you may have played a game where your player characters kind of just want to run amok and don't really have much regard for the other non-player characters in the game. And that's just fine. But in this game, the non-player characters are going to at least hopefully defend themselves using the village items of wherever they're at. So village or town level and dungeon level is going to come into effect in terms of how many items a village can use at once, and also how powerful a village's attack, defense, and ego ratings are off the bat. So when a player wants an item or wants to get information from the village or wants to make a deal or work in the village, they're going to be contending with the village in social combat, and the village is going to use the attack ratings of various items on the village or town sheet, and yeah, you're going to resolve your disputes like that. Sometimes if the village wins, most of the time the character is going to get the item or whatever things they're after, or maybe they'll get an altered item, or maybe they won't get an item until they've done some special task for the town. These tasks can be dungeon based, so the villagers can send them on fetch quests, although you know you want to fit it with the story so it doesn't feel like a fetch quest. There you go, another mistake. You guys can keep that one too. Yeah, fetch quests, I guess, if that's how you want to think about it, or just actual genuine adventures and things like that. Maybe the characters have to repair some of the village items to keep the village from becoming destroyed by invading monsters and things like that. So just try to work with the village. And as you can see here, I've filled one out, and it's got a bunch of different items, like it's got a smithy, mine, a mill, some farmland. We've got a village name. It's level 4, just like it appeared on the map, and that determines its attack, defense, and ego. What else? We've got isolated, things like that. So that'll come into play as we play the game. You guys will kind of understand more how these items work as we play. Alright, so pretty much the last component here is your side characters and monsters. So as the narrator, you're going to be pretty much in charge of all the side characters and monsters. So most of the NPCs in the world are going to be kind of taken place by the village. But if you want to have like a special side character, so like maybe a villain or maybe an ally for the party, you're going to represent them through side characters. So they'll have special abilities, kind of like a character does, that'll allow them to have more in-game presence and allow you to kind of center stories or things like that around them. The other component are monsters. So this is the main objective for monsters is combat usually. So you're going to represent them in dungeons. They're going to be opposing the character's interests when they go to achieve their goals within dungeons. So monsters can be heavily combative, or you can make them socially combative. The ability for a monster to kind of like convince the characters to run away instead of fight. That's a pretty interesting dungeon component and an interesting way to tell a story that has a lot of conflict. So there's a lot of different ways you can employ monsters and side characters. Side characters, they can be kind of combative things, but it's going to be harder for you to make an effective combatant out of a side character. So it's probably a good idea to just stick with social things. If you want to make a side character or a villain that's good at fighting, you could make alternate components or alternative versions, so a side character version and a monster version. So he's maybe good, or he or she or whatever creature you make is good at social combat and the physical component of the game. So yeah, it comes with a little bit of experience, but it's a fairly streamlined and dynamic version or way to do things. When I release the game, there will be like a monster manual and a side character manual, so you won't have to always make your own. But I highly encourage players to make their own. Like, I mean, if you're a DM, you've probably spent hours and hours making things that the characters never saw. And this stuff, if you make it, the players are going to directly encounter it. Another cool thing about this is, you know, if you're experienced at it, it doesn't take very long to make these kind of things. So you can sit down right at the table with your players and be like, okay, what do you guys want to fight? What do you think kind of weapons they should have? What kind of side characters do you think should be in this village? Who do you think is important? So if the players want to have a vested interest in, you know, who they fight or who they're being pals with in the game, then you can give them a lot of power in terms of that kind of thing. It doesn't take very long to make this kind of stuff, and it really doesn't take away from the experience of the game, because in a lot of ways, the players are really excited to have a say in, you know, how these things are gonna play out in front of them. You know, they've made their characters to encounter certain difficulties, so you may as well challenge them, right? I don't know, that's my opinion. And we're pretty much ready to start playing the game, so I'll give you a little bit closer view here. I think we have the monster sheet in front of us. So basically the monster sheet is 3 tiny little character sheets, and you're going to use them to create like a group of monsters that you can use to fight the characters. Usually I make my monsters synergistically, so they kind of help each other. So one of them takes a specialized role while the other one covers the blind points of the other one, and then the third one kind of helps mitigate the blind points of the other two, right? So we have our lowly goblin gang. So we have a goblin thug, a goblin enforcer, and a goblin shaman. So our thug is going to be our main damage dealer. our enforcer, you know, he may have a few more hit points and survive a couple hits. And our shaman, he's going to be kind of our crowd control, or our ability to, you know, add some chaos into the battle there. Most monsters are only going to have one hit point. You can calculate their health to the fullest, but unless they're like a boss monster or they have some special power, they're going to go down after one hit, and that makes it quite a bit of fun for the players. And it can make it kind of a challenge for the narrator, but you have to remember, as the narrator, you're not out to just absolutely murder your players. You want to make them have a challenging time. So create your monster sheets to generate a particular experience, exploit a particular weakness in the players, and maybe make them run away from battles and stuff like that. That's an acceptable end to how things work, because survival, you know, that's a good thing. Here's our side character sheet. So it looks pretty similar to our monster sheet, and is in fact just a tiny little character sheet. The side characters I've made here are going to be what we're using for our little showcase of the game here. I don't want to use just one character, and this will make it easier for me to kind of roll several characters at once. So that's another interesting component of this game, is having 3 monsters on one sheet allows you to kind of synergize the movements of several monsters in combat at once. You're not flipping through a monster manual trying to find, you know, 3 different monsters. So it makes the game a little bit more streamlined. Yeah, so those are the major components of the game. Once you have everything filled out here, you can pretty much get started. So I'm going to show you guys in my next video kind of some cool little bits, and we'll basically play through a normal session. Yeah, cool little bits. Cool, see you guys.